Trying to get
Liz
you.
is perfect.
Yes, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
And I want to make an introduction. Super excited to introduce you to my associate creative director, Mariama Hudson,
Hi,
right
it's so nice to meet you.
this
Hi,
way.
it's nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you, so I'm really looking forward into the deep dive today.
Can't wait.
Mariama, I told her I wasn't going to be creepy fangirl. You were supposed to keep that to
All right,
yourself.
all right.
So yeah, we're super excited. Thank you for making time for the call. We
Absolutely.
far exceeds what we're doing. So let us know if you have questions, but I'm just gonna dive in.
Sounds great.
I'm brilliant at editing, so say whatever and we'll capture it.
Hi, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Way, and I am the curator of fashion and accessories at the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology. I'm also the curator of Ann Lowe American Couturier, which was on view at the Winterthur Museum in 2023. And I've been studying Ann Lowe for over a decade now.
Hi, I'm Janine Barnett Silberblatt. I am the creator and creative director of the Ann Lowe Tribute. All right, so let's dive right in. Okay, so Liz, can we start by you sharing a bit about your journey as a fashion historian and how you came to focus on the intersection of Black American culture and fashion?
Absolutely. I think like a lot of people who are in the fashion industry in all of its capacities, I just fell in love with fashion as a kid. So growing up reading Vogue in my small town, I wanted to be a designer. I went to school for that and was very lucky to realize that that wasn't for me. So I've actually worked in a lot of different aspects. I've been a pattern maker. I worked in theater costuming because history has always also been a passion of mine. And I really, took a 180 turn when I decided to go back to school for graduate school and study fashion history specifically. And it was halfway through my master's program that I interned at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And my dream job was to dig into some initial research on the Black Fashion Museum collection, which is an amazing collection put together by Lois Alexander Lane from the 1970s, looking specifically at Black fashion. And, I had taken fashion history as an undergraduate, as a grad student, and I had never heard of Ann Lowe. And so it was during that summer doing that initial research, this was way back in 2012, that I first came across her story. And, it was that experience learning about her and other Black designers that really set me on my path to focus on the intersection of Black American culture and fashion.
Amazing. I mean, we feel like we've had the same, like, why have we not known about her all this time? So to know that a fashion historian also had no clue. So thank you for doing this work. We're going to introduce a lot more people to her earlier. Okay, so what initially drew you to Ann Lowe's story, and why did you feel it was important to highlight her contributions in your work and exhibits?
I think my way in was a lot of people's way in, and it was that this woman had designed Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding dress. This was a famous wedding dress that was photographed. It was put in newspapers and magazines, not just at the time, but later as well. And so I wanted to know more about this woman and this designer, because how have I never heard of this? Jacqueline Kennedy is a fashion icon. So how did I not know that this Black dressmaker made her wedding dress? And so that was my way in. But the more I learned about not only the prestige of all of her clients and her amazing, absolutely amazing material culture, but just her life story, her biography, everything about her I found really fascinating. It was like reading, of course you spoke with amazing writer Piper Hughley, but it was like reading a fictional story. So I was just immediately sucked into just every interesting aspect of her life and career.
I completely agree. Amazing story from like fairy tale to heroine's tale, like everything about it. It's all there. And Piper also shared that, just like it had everything you wanted in historical fiction. So, as someone who curates and researches extensively, what has been your most rewarding experience when presenting Ann Lowe's legacy to new audiences?
When I speak about Ann Lowe and I talk about this woman who learned fashion at such an early age, who mastered her skill by the time she was a teenager and went on to have this amazing roster of clients, people are so surprised and they're so sucked into that story. And that's the hook. But when I tell them everything that she went through, all of her perseverance, the way she built, businesses in 3 different cities in her lifetime, it's like the realization that this amazingly talented professional was making American fashion. It's their kind of realization, not only of her story, but I think also the idea that there's so many stories we don't know. So I think that's my favorite part. It's a process. It's seeing that story unwind for people and seeing the kind of those revelations.
That feels like our story. Absolutely. And I want everyone to have that. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears from your introduction and introduction of Ann Lowe to exploring Ann Lowe's craftsmanship and design. Obviously this is very much your work. We want to make sure they discover Ann the artist, and you've studied her craft in depth. So that's the spirit of a lot of these questions. So Ann Lowe's designs are celebrated for their intricate handiwork and attention to detail. From your perspective, what sets her craftsmanship apart from other designers of her time?
So Ann Lowe trained in a 19th century kind of methodology for making clothing. It was handmade, it was intricate, it was also very feminine, it was very detailed. And she took that kind of spirit of making clothing into her career. So, when she was making clothes in the 1920s and 30s that were much more streamlined, she was still putting all of this very thoughtful hand detail into it. And so when we look at her clothes compared to, something else from, the time period, and when we say time period, we mean anywhere from the 20s to the 60s. That's how long she was working. We just see not only the quality of the sewing, but the thoughtfulness of the embellishments, that we see the presence of her hand, and you turn it inside out and the inside is as beautiful as the outside. So what we're looking at is just really high quality clothing. And I can sew, I can pattern make, and that knowledge gives me just enough knowledge to know how much better she is than like 90% of the clothing that you will ever see. So it's a really intimate experience, and like a pleasure and a privilege to be able to like open up her dresses, look at the inside, and really just realize the amount of skill and talent and care that she put into these pieces.
Couldn't agree more. And you're kind of seeing a return to that in today's fashion world, right? As people get excited about Daniel Rosenberry and what he's doing, there's a return to like admiring construction, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so getting into Jackie a little bit. So could you walk us through the design process Ann Lowe might have used to create one of her famous gowns, such as the Jackie Kennedy wedding dress?
So Ann Lowe made custom couture clothing. So it was very different from what New York was known for, which was ready to wear. So ready to wear is the clothes that we all have. We walk into a store, we find our size, we buy it. When you went to Ann Lowe for a special occasion dress, she measured you, she talked to you about what you wanted in that design, what the occasion was for, what parts of your personality you wanted to come out. This was a custom dress that was just for you. So not only did it fit you perfectly physically, it was meant to, so many debutantes have talked about how her dresses gave them courage. They're on this big social platform, and like she made them feel beautiful. So if we think about someone like Jacqueline Kennedy, she was brought to Ann Lowe's Couturier by her mother. Her mother was a very loyal client, Janet Auchincloss. And, she sat down with Lowe. Lowe, sat her down in her beautiful atelier, served her tea, and they talked. They talked about, what she wanted in her wedding dress. And of course, Jacqueline Kennedy's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier's mother, would have had a big part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
And she says that she sketched this big wedding dress that was reminiscent of the types of ball gowns that her grandmother would be making in the 1860s. And if we look at Kennedy's dress, it really is the kind of that big 19th century silhouette. But this was a woman who was marrying a junior senator. They were already kind of these socialites with this huge future ahead of them. So they needed this big over-the-top dress. Joseph Kennedy and Janet Auchincloss were planning the wedding of the century. And so Ann Lowe delivered that dress for that occasion. And that's what makes her work special, because it fits the occasion perfectly. That's why you went to someone like Ann Lowe, to get that perfect dress that you couldn't find on the rack.
It's interesting. Linda mentioned dresses giving her courage as well. So Mari, I'm reiterating that for us to kind of hold on to that thread a little bit. Not everyone thinks about clothing as doing that. And a fun fact I'll share with both of you that we can talk about more over drinks versus in the interview. but I had a similar. I understand that experience of a couturier designing and talking to you, because my father's godmother was a couturier and pretty famous in the Caribbean, and so
amazing.
I talked to her and watched her design my prom dress, and then she made it, and so that experience is nothing quite like it. Yeah,
it's a very special. When you're a bride or a debutante and you're nervous and you have a lot of social expectations, that can be the thing that carries you through.
100%. I was an athlete. I didn't want my muscles to show. Like, and she listened, and but when she was, I'm like, that's it. I like, it's a very emotional thing. So I totally,
Absolutely.
totally get it. Okay, so I'm diving into this next question. We sidebarred about this question a little bit, just because the thread that I'm going to continue pulling, I think, through my career is some of the business ramifications of all of this for folks. But please answer this question authentically, and if I want to prod a little bit, this is probably where I will. Okay, so Ann Lowe often worked behind the scenes and was under-recognized during her lifetime. In what ways do you think her experiences reflect the broader challenges faced by Black designers in the fashion industry historically and even today?
So Ann Lowe was a master artisan. She was a designer. She was an artist, but she was working in a medium that isn't always respected as art. And certainly not every piece of clothing is art. The clothing she made was art. So she already had that against her, that people weren't taking fashion necessarily seriously. It was women's work. And then the fact that she was a Black woman who was working with elite white women really put her at a power disadvantage. So she had to really tread carefully to be able to assert herself as an artisan, as a businesswoman, but also, give the reverence, the respect to these people who definitely expected that out of all the people they interacted with, but certainly with the Black people they interacted with. Lowe trained under her grandmother and her mother in Alabama, and these women also catered to these elite women in a time where those differences would have been even more pronounced. So I know that not only did they train her in how to put a dress together, they trained her in how to deal with these rich white women and what line they had to walk to maintain those relationships. And Lowe was very good at maintaining relationships. People genuinely liked her. They talked about how kind she was, but also how dignified, how she was someone who commanded respect, but also in a way that made people feel at ease. And so that was a very special skill that she had.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. So just to pull that into present day, when you think about that line, I kind of love the way you framed that, just walking that line. Any parallels or contrasts, because if there's progress there, that's fine too. Any parallels or contrasts to what walking that line means to Black designers today?
When we think about Black designers today, they've certainly, as a society, we have moved forward since the 1960s. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But, to be able to show up in a space, whether you're the creator or you're the person with the business plan, people are still look at Black people differently than they look at white people. And so Lowe dealt with those things. She was also a woman in a time period where women didn't have their own bank accounts, and she was running a business.
Wow.
So today we see Black designers facing some of those same challenges, being taken seriously, both creatively and, economically. And that's something that Black people have been, systematically shut out of historically, and we're still trying to make those gains. So whether it's, having trouble getting a bank loan or, being mistaken for the delivery person when you walk into the showroom, those things are unfortunately still happening. And Ann Lowe would have had a lot of experience with those things.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for pulling that thread. Okay, so I'm going to move on to just the time and dedication and beauty in Ann Lowe's work. So totally giving you an opportunity to nerd out on everything from master's program on. So first question here. So Ann Lowe referred to her designs as her children. Fun fact, Ava DuVernay refers to her movies as her children. So I get it. So what do you think this reveals about her relationship to her work and her dedication to her craft?
So one of the things that one of the ways I really position Ann Lowe as a woman who made the transition from dressmaker to designer. She was certainly a skilled master dressmaker. She had all of the technical skills needed, but she was also a designer in that she looked at her practice as an artistic practice. She really she thought about her inspiration. She talked about how she dreamed of dresses. She would get up in the middle of the night to sketch. This was an artistic impulse that she couldn't bottle it. She couldn't stop doing it. This was her life's work. And that's, I think, what sets her apart as from a craftsperson and making her an artist. So when we look at the things that she designed today, we see not just this intricate detail. And she was a multi-hyphenate when it comes to artistry. She could paint flowers. Flowers were her specialty. She could paint them. She could bead them. She could embroider them. She could build them three-dimensionally out of fabric. She was working in so many different dimensions within her craft. we see the balance of her eye, we see the way she put colors together, and you combine that with her very high hand skills, and you just get these pieces that they take your breath away. There's a story in a newspaper about a debutante who had to bring her dress back to Lowe because her date snipped off one of the fabric flowers to save as a memento. He thought it was a real flower. And so he cut the flower off, and she needed her dress repaired, so she had to bring it back to Lowe. And like when you hear that story, like the first time I read it, I was like, how could you mistake a fabric flower for a real one? But when you start to look at her pieces, you really start to get it. Like the craftsmanship, the artistry, it's all right there.
That's incredible. I love that. And I we ended the first part of the first reel around her like wanting to prove that a Negro can become a major dress designer. And Linda brought up that quote as well. And you're bringing up this leap, and it's no small thing, right? Like being a dressmaker versus a designer. And two things that I was thinking about as I was sitting with that. One, just her love of the craft, which you kind of get at with the dreaming of it. But there's a little bit of not a lot of love for her people, right? Like I'm trying to make a point for us,
Yes.
Which is super super powerful. So because we talked about her legacy being around kind of perseverance and certainly beauty and joy, and just love is shining through for me more and more, like through what she does, the beauty and the craft. And certainly, she loved all of us. She was trying to make a point for all of us.
Yes.
So her floral motifs and custom hand-sewn embellishments have become iconic. How do you think these elements communicate her artistic voice, and what messages do they send to today's designers and fashion enthusiasts?
So Ann Lowe, she could do any kind of embellishment, but flowers were her signature. And she talks about how when she was first learning to sew, she would go out to the garden and copy these flowers in the garden in the fabric scraps left by her grandmother and her mother. So it's a beautiful origin story, but it really became her signature. And I think that that is a really powerful visual message to have as a fashion designer, whether it was, when she was working or for fashion designers today. When you have a visual communicative style, when you're saying something consistent with your work, even as the season change, even as your designs evolve. And she was designing flapper dresses to almost like hippie 1970s flower power styles. She was running the gamut. But when she had this visual thread that was carrying her through, it was her personality coming out in these garments. And you can see how she put herself into them. And I think when you look at designers today, we can tell when, there's a personal story, a narrative being put into those clothes. And if there's like a visual signature that we can follow along with, I think it's just, it helps us as consumers really connect with that designer and like buy into their story. And so I think Lowe's designs were a really evocative way of telling her life story. Flowers are delicate and beautiful, but they're so strong, and they are, they come back every year, and perseverance was definitely, something that defined her career. And so I think if you can tell a story with your designs the way she did, it's just a beautiful way to connect with your customer base.
Okay, you are so gifted. I wanted to write down every word you were saying, and like we're recording it. It's fine. I can rewatch it. That was so beautiful.
I'm like not saying much over here. I'm
exactly
really
like Mariama. Like I told her, I was like, Liz is a pro. You're not gonna have to. But I'm just like, honestly, cut, take, like, done, book it. Like what? Go for it, Mariama.
Can ever speak? Like I know she had that interview, but did she ever speak about what the flowers meant for her?
She talked a lot about this origin story. It was repeated in several interviews about how, some of her earliest sewing activities were copying these flowers in the garden. And every designer has an origin story. And she really honed this one. And I think it was because it was so important to her. I think it really represented her earliest memories of this ability. Her sewing ability carried her from the Jim Crow South to Tampa, Florida, to New York City. She rubbed shoulders with some of the most important people in our country. And it was because that she could sew. And so I think that the fact that she connects flowers to her origin story in such a specific way really speaks to how important they are for her, symbolically, aesthetically. They come up over and over in her designs. And so I don't know that she spoke very specifically about what flowers meant to her, but I think that she said it over and over in her designs.
So like you just said something that I think every designer should hear around. And the term visual signature is staying with me, the term origin story, because I feel like we're also in a moment in fashion where there is this kind of like exhaustion of kind of like the trend exhaustion. And
Mhm.
so we're already talking about whether it's quiet luxury or just like timeless style, like that's a very current thought. This is also
Yeah.
super timeless, right? Like the
Yeah.
greatest designers, we know their signature. So I love the way you said visual signature and origin story. I think we'll be playing with those two, amplifying those two for sure.
Mhm. Outside of
Okay.
the context of designing, but a
Mhm.
visual signature, even speaking for me as a creative person, like how that, translates into your work. Yeah, that I like that.
Right. I think it's gonna expand to create. We say that at the end of the first one. Like she has a message for creatives more broadly, entrepreneurs more
Mhm.
broadly. And so where we're really passionate about telling her story in detail, like giving specifics, but also zooming out to what's there for everyone. Even in this detail section, we've been able to zoom out. So from what you discovered through your research and your curatorial work, were there any specific techniques or materials that Ann Lowe consistently turned to when creating her signature designs? We talked technique, but we haven't talked materials as much. Anything?
So a really wonderful kind of discovery that I've made about Lowe's pieces, and it's certainly something that other people have noticed as well, is that when you look at work from like the high points of her career in the 50s and 60s, you can open up a dress and you can tell that she made it because of the way that she built the interior of the bodice. And she was known for making a perfect fit. So you didn't need undergarments. You could just slip right into your dress and it would be supportive, even if the dress was very heavy. And so the way that she laid out the boning, she had elastics and she had waist tapes that held this dress to you. She built it in such a specific way that we can recognize dresses that she made, even if her label isn't in it. And we know that she trained other people in this technique. And so these techniques lived on into the fashion industry. So
Mm.
she did have very specific techniques in the way she built dresses that of course, I think she learned from her grandmother and her mother. When it comes to materials, she used the best material. She used silks. She used all of these different understructure fabrics to make sure like all the layers were working together to create this perfect silhouette. But she also experimented with what was out there. There's a beautiful dress at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a wedding dress from the early 40s that's made out of acetate. And I love this dress because it really shows you how she was a designer working in a larger world. By that point, we already see the silk shortages from World War II. It had already started in East Asia, and so silk was hard to get. But she
Mhm.
made this gorgeous wedding dress out of acetate because that was what was available. And it has these hand sculpted Bermuda lilies on it. She didn't put less effort in because it wasn't silk.
Mhm.
And so we see her taking advantages of all of these new materials. Today we might not think like nylon is a high end material, but in the 60s it was new, it was innovative, and so she uses a lot of these materials in the interiors of her dresses, but she still maintains like, the highest quality fabrics on the outsides. So those are two things, technology and tradition working together in her work.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's actually really, really interesting. I'm gonna shift gears to legacy and impact now. That's a fun way to wrap this up. So the first question for you, although she worked in an era where recognition was scarce, her legacy has become more prominent today. What do you think sparked this resurgence of interest in her work?
I think we're all looking for ways to tell new stories about the familiar objects in our lives. I'm a curator, so I call them objects. We might call them things. We might call them garments. I also call them material culture because that's what they are. This is our culture made material, made, physical.
Mhm.
And so when we look at a dress like Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding dress, we certainly have the story of this first lady, but we have other just as interesting, if not more interesting, stories about who made them. We can tell those stories about Mary Todd Lincoln's dressmaker, Elizabeth Keckley, as well. There's all of these hidden stories in these things. And so we, as people of color, as Black people, we can tell our histories through these objects that were only used to tell mainstream histories. And so if we can look at these objects from different angles, we can realize that we've always been there in history. Yeah, I'm a fashion historian. We've always been there in fashion history. And
Mhm.
so I think that there's a yearning for those stories. Anlo's also such an interesting person. You don't have to be a Black woman to just be captivated by all that she went through, all that she overcame. She lived a life. And so it's a fascinating story. So I think that this resurgence and interest in her is so specific to Black people, but also to a much broader audience who are just inspired by someone who worked so hard and overcame so much.
I think that's spot on. We said, when we first put it out, this is about Black history, fashion history, and American history. Like she's a part of moments in American history. And we've had actually some people comment on our content. They're like, I'm an American historian. Like, how do I not know this? So the same kind of feeling we have as people close to fashion, people like, how do I not know this person?
Mm-hmm.
Tita American history. And that's what I mean by going as ambitious as household name.
Yes.
You don't need to be into fashion. This should be a household name on the level of many, many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have always been here is just such a quote, like
See?
it's so hard.
Always been here.
It's not that it's something new.
Right.
Always been here in plain sight, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I appreciate you for that. Liz, and this is, full disclosure, my business mind coming out here. So there's obviously the passion we all share in terms of, yes, use this relevant thing to tell a story again. But as you mentioned in our last call, and as a curator, like that's the work. You are challenged to come up with making these objects relevant. So to get people into the museum, that work is actually, it's not just a nice to have. And there's so much of the Black story that we're hearing, like it's not just a nice to have, it's actually good business sense.
Yes.
Here we are again, it's like, actually, my job is to come up with new stories. And there are a bunch of them that have been hidden and buried and overlooked that allows me to do my work. So I wanted to resurface that because the way you talked about like part of, and I also wanted to be an entry point to make sure people understand what a curator does, can do, is interested in doing. So I don't know how to frame this question, but just this idea of it is both refreshing to be able to tell new stories, but also that's the work of what you do. So what role do you think museums, curators, and fashion historians play in ensuring that designers like Ann Lowe receive the credit and visibility they may have been denied during their lifetimes?
I think a really important part of our jobs as curators, as people who work at museums, are to tell these compelling stories. And it's really important that we're telling marginalized stories, but so often it's not like we have to embellish these stories to make them relevant for huge swaths of our audiences, not just Black people, not just women, not just people interested in fashion. We don't have to embellish them. These are interesting, fascinating stories that are telling us about our American culture. And so as a curator, it's my job to find something that is going to inspire people. And when I'm looking, my specialty is Black American fashion. I don't have to look very far. Almost any designer that I can dig into and think about their story and what, how they got into their business, how they design, it's all right there. Ann Lowe is like at the top of that list just because she's such a compelling, her story's so compelling. She's such a talented artist. She has it all. But it's my job to make those stories accessible, make them available so that they do become, kind of suffused in the wider culture. I'm really excited that like a movie is going to come out about her. And, in my own small way, like putting her things on display, other museums putting their things on display, writing books, writing articles, those are for an academic audience. Those are for a museum audience, which is a general audience. And then, we can have even, more kind of prominent things like movies, like this tribute. And so we want to see her in all of these different spaces and all of these different levels. But, as academics, we have to dig through the newspaper archives. We have to look at our collection and look at the actual material culture. We have to do that groundwork so that creatives can take it and move in a direction. They can write books. So that's our job. It's a part of our job that is actually really fulfilling. And it's a part of our job that brings people into the museum. We have to have things on display. We have to produce work. But when I look at someone like Ann Lowe, it's just such an effortless way to engage people. And so in that way, it's a real plus for us that we have this interesting person who's her story is already selling herself. We don't have to do much to do it, but we do have to put those objects, that information out there to attract people.
Do you happen to have a copy of your book? Let's buy that. Okay, so that and right. So just again, because you've done this work for many Black designers, and it is a passion of yours. So, and part of what what you just shared is bringing up for me related to the conversation with Piper yesterday. Like both of you have done, like there's just a lot of rigor to the work that you've done that has taken it to a wider audience. And we feel passionately about taking the baton and like, okay, how do we take it to more people? And I came away from that conversation and I'm hearing it again in this one and just really kind of mapping out this pipeline and framework of how the word travels and exposing it
Mhm.
so more people can intentionally figure out where they want to play a role. Most no notes, we're just gushing at this point. We're like, this is so good. Okay, so home stretch here. If Ann Lowe were alive today and witnessing the impact of her work that her work has had, what do you think she would say about the fashion industry and her influence on it?
Something that I really love about Ann Lowe when I read her quotes in newspapers or magazines is that she wasn't that modest. She said like, she did these beautiful flowers. She said, all of these flowers that you see in New York on these debutantes, those are mine. Those are people copying my flowers, or I'm the one just making these hundreds of dresses. She was always very thankful to the people who helped her, but she also knew her worth. She knew that she was an excellent designer. So I think that she would probably say it's about time. Like, how did it take so long? And the really fortunate thing about her work is that because she worked for these elite white women, these were the type of women who gave their dresses to museums. So her dresses are out there. The Met has a dozen. We have several at the museum at FIT, and museums across the country have them. The Smithsonian has, the most number of dresses of Ann Lowe, but there are dozens out there, if not more, and we're very lucky for that.
Yeah.
So that material culture was always there waiting for all of us to realize. And so I think she would have been like, what took so long?
Amazing, amazing. I'm bursting only because Piper and Linda said it's about time as well. So I'm just like, okay, we're definitely capturing that quote since all three of you have said it and we feel it. But yeah, it is about time. Like we feel very privileged to play a small part in giving her her flowers and introducing more people to her. Like, what would you say to someone who is an aspiring curator?
So growing up, I loved fashion, but I didn't know that being a fashion curator was an occupation that you can have. It took me a long time to find it. And it does take, graduate school, and it takes lots of education, and you have to be curious. You have to read and you have to write, but you also get to spend time with one of a kind objects. And that is my favorite part. Ann Lowe is, her material culture just blows you away. But I spend a lot of my time with, historic clothing, contemporary fashion, and being able to use them to tell stories about us as Black people, to tell stories about people as American people, as, fashion creators all over the world. And so I think if you want to be a curator, it's the way to combine a love of design and fashion with academia. And I think for some people, that's a sweet spot. I know it is for me. So it's not necessarily a job that you might think of, but it's one that is really fulfilling and a way that you can explore all of these stories.
Again, nailed it. Cut. Okay. And that resonated with me. I think I'll certainly share personally. I've been trying to reconcile kind of the love of fashion, which is not always seen, like you said, as art or academic scholarship, but
Mhm.
also kind of being a smart cookie and wanting to like do something rigorous. And so this marriage of rigor and scholarship and fashion is resonates with me as well. So thank you for articulating that for all the people who are reaching for both. They are not at odds. You can actually marry
Yes.
them. Um,
No, you seem like this is a very passionate project. But I don't know if it's your favorite thing that you have worked on.
I
Um,
would definitely say it's a favorite for sure.
okay, so maybe we can kind of like go along those lines and kind of just expressing your gratitude for being able to work on this and to highlight and what you're hoping that other people will get out of hearing Anne's story.
It has been the privilege of my life to work on all of the Ann Lowe work that I've done. I came across her as a grad student. I was able to curate an exhibition about her. And that was so important for me because Ann Lowe is a person who elevates fashion to art. And that's what makes fashion relevant in our lives. That's what makes it material culture that has lasting impact. And she was an artist. That was her. And so being able to tell her story, to show people her art, that's been a privilege for me. So if we think about telling Ann Lowe's story, for example, I think of myself as kind of the third layer. Ann Lowe is, of course, the nucleus. And then I was able to talk to so many people who knew her, who worked with her. And that was the second layer. And capturing their stories was such an important part of building the narrative of the book, of the exhibition, of all the work that I do. And so myself as a third layer, I write those stories, I put them into context, I connect them to her dresses on display, and I make those, I network that all into this kind of, this quilt, this story that I can tell to others. And then from there, other researchers are going to look at what I've done and build on it and find new perspectives. But then creatives can also take over, and they can use that as some raw material to get them on their own research journeys to write books and make movies. And designers can use that as inspiration for their own designs, their own artistic practices. So I'm definitely kind of in the middle here in this like kind of chain of storytelling, but I'm in a really privileged place because I get to talk to the people who knew her. I get to do that. I get to read her newspaper interviews and, look at her clothing and then make that into a packageable kind of product that other people can access and then run away with.
Yeah, that's great. So you said, I hope I didn't interrupt with my laughter there, but I was laughing because you said chain of storytelling. Obviously, we're calling this the storytellers because it's so very clear that you are a storyteller and a very key storyteller in Ann's story. So thank you. Just every time I hear alignment, I get excited. Yeah.
Yes.
Is there anything that you are hoping to be seen highlighted in the movie?
I am just really excited to see her on the big screen. So I hope, I believe that the story is going to focus on her making Jacqueline Kennedy's dress, and that was a harrowing experience for her. And so I think the thing that comes out for me about that story is, first of all, her perseverance, which is just an ongoing thread in her story, but also her dignity, the pride that she took in her work, and the way that she showed up and represented for Black people. She wasn't going to complain about the accident that was happened. The dress was going to make it there on time, and she wasn't going to talk to the mother of the bride about what happened on that day. She was going to let events unfold. Her dress was going to be the center, the star, and she was just going to be professional and carry on. And it was really hard, but she always presented like this perfect facade. That was really important to her and in the work that she did. And so I hope those kind of feelings kind of come through in the movie. But a movie is such a perfect way to convey the emotion of that. So I'm really excited for it.
Is there any next step in your Ann Lowe journey? Do you feel like I've done the work, I've done the exhibition, I've done the books, it's out there and I've passed the baton? Is there more in your sphere of influence to do?
I hope that I'm always researching Ann Lowe. Something that was really meaningful that came out of the exhibition is that more people realized that they had Ann Lowe dresses in their closets, whether it was their debutante dresses, their mom's wedding dress, or maybe even just photos of their mothers and their grandmothers in these dresses. And so collecting more of that material culture, hopefully doing more exhibitions, continuing to dig into her story. There are 100 books on Christian Dior, and so there can certainly be 200 books on Ann Lowe. So the work is never going to be done.
This is such an honor, and we just really.
This has been so fun. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Mariama, you want to stay on for a little bit?
Yeah, we can stay on and chat a little bit.
Thanks, Liz.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.